Well, hello there. I'm Pastor Dan Stark, and I want to welcome you to this 23rd Sunday after the Pentecost and Halloween. This week, we're going to conclude our October-themed sermon series, Holy Ghost Stories. And this week, we explore a particularly spooky but powerful story from the Gospels about the Syrophoenician or Canaanite woman, about her daughter, really, who happens to be possessed by a demon. In our passages today, we hear about wrestling with God and how Jesus sort of functions as an exorcist in this story. And these are difficult issues. What can we learn about what it means to be in relationship with God or one another from the story of Jesus as the exorcist? So today, we're going to explore Jesus as exorcist, exorcising demons or evil spirits, and hopefully it can be a fun but meaningful service for you. So let us worship together with our call to worship. Praise the one who breaks the darkness. We worship you, O God. Praise the one who blesses beyond measure. We praise you, O God. Praise the one who feeds and leads us. We lift you up, O God. Praise our Creator and giver of life. We worship you, O God. Would you pray with me? Source of life, breath of life, word of life. We come to you as your people. Look upon us with your mercy and your loving kindness, and be with us today as we worship together. Restore us to you, raise us from our pain and brokenness, so that we may live in the wholeness you desire for each of us. I pray this in your many names. Amen. Our first lesson today comes from Genesis 32, verses 22 through 32. Now, Genesis is a book of new beginnings, and in the primeval story we hear today, Jacob wrestles with an angel, or the Spirit of God, and lives to talk about it. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford to the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans, and you have prevailed." And then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why do you seek my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen the face of God, yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket, because Jacob was struck on the hip socket at the thigh muscle. Our second lesson today comes from Mark chapter 7, verses 24 through 30. This is the same story we're going to talk about in Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 through 28. It's the story of the Canaanite woman in Mark's gospel, but in Matthew's gospel, she's called the Syrophoenician woman. So I'm going to read both of these scriptures back to back. They're the same story. They use the same source material, okay? They both draw, Mark's gospel is the source of Matthew, so you're obviously going to hear some similarities. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him. She came and bowed at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take their food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And then Jesus said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. Same story now, but from Matthew. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away. She keeps shouting at us." He answered, "I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and she knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered, "It's not fair to give the children's food to the dogs." And she said, "Yes, Lord, but even dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Jesus was moved. He answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. Quite the story. But thanks be to God for a love like that. Holy Ghost stories. Jesus the Exorcist. The Exorcist. Some of us probably have terrible memories affiliated with this movie. Scary stuff, right? Well, luckily, when Jesus exorcises a demon, an evil spirit, there's a lot less projectile stuff involved. But instead, there's wrestling. Wrestling? Let's talk a little bit about it. Wrestling, or wrestling, for those of you that didn't grow up in the country, can teach us a lot about relationships. When I was a kid, my parents kept all 5 of the Stark boys occupied with sports when we weren't busy with school. I wasn't very sporty when I was growing up. I never had a lot of fight in me. Regardless, they had me go out for wrestling when I was in junior high because my other brothers did it. Now, there was a C team, which was basically like the Misfits team. There was the B team, which was like the junior team. And then there was the A team, that was the varsity team. And I was on the C team, kind of like the cobbled together, gimpy group. A rare opportunity presented itself, however, when one of the kids on the B team was sick or didn't make weight, so I had the opportunity to wrestle in their weight class. So I had to try out for the B team. It was like something you had to do, and the tryouts changed my junior high experience forever. A buxom farm girl that year also happened to be out for wrestling. She had grown up lugging things around on the farm and wanted to channel her energy into slamming boys down on the mat. And although she was a better wrestler than most of the guys, and she probably should have been on the varsity team, I'm pretty convinced that the coach didn't know what the heck to do with her. So she happened to be in the same weight class as me at the time, and we had to try out against each other. I would have just gladly said, let her have it, but the coach forced us to go toe-to-toe. Well, within about 30 seconds, I was in a headlock in front of about 25 teenage boys that were jeering and cheering, and I was thrown to the mat and got pinned right there and then. They called me the fish because I flopped around. The boys laughed, but rightfully so, she kicked my butt. With a bruised body, ego, maybe even some tears that I was fighting back because I knew this was going to follow me, I walked out of the practice room, and I never came back. I never turned back. Despite having upset parents that had paid like the $50 for me to go to wrestling, an angry coach that had to fill a spot now on the Z team, and some classmates who wanted me to come back, I never looked back. The sense of community was filled with those vivid remembrances of people laughing at me and mocking me and pointing at me. It wasn't that I didn't deserve to get beat, and it wasn't that I had a problem getting beat by a girl. It's that they made me feel so crummy. To reconcile the relationships of the people that made me feel so awful was the real issue. So I quit, and the relationships were left broken. I think wrestling can teach you a lot about community, but also just relationships in general. Our story today from Genesis this morning about Jacob and the angel, or Jacob and the God, and our gospel lessons, which involves Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman, kind of going back and forth. These are stories that have to do with wrestling, I think. About tossing and turning, about a verbal exchange, about push and pull with God and with each other. We hear about relationships with God, and we hear about human relationships. Today, we're going to laser focus on what the gospel lessons, the 2 of them that draw from each other, what they tell us. But before we talk about wrestling, I think we need to understand what's happening that sets the match between Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman. This is an exorcism story, of all things. So there's the Halloween part for you. Mark's gospel paints the scene for us. It says Jesus entered a house and he didn't want anybody to know he was there. But he couldn't escape notice. A woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and she bowed down at his feet, and she begged him to cast this demon, this evil spirit, this unclean spirit out of her daughter. Now, I don't think in Mark's gospel it's what the woman wants, but how she says what she wants to Jesus. We don't know what it is that she says exactly, but we hear that she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. In Matthew's gospel, on the other hand, we hear some more words from this woman. In Matthew, she begs Jesus, saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon. Have mercy on me." Now that's interesting. Have mercy on me, my daughter is sick with this demon or evil spirit. Not have mercy on my daughter, but have mercy on me, her mom. By getting rid of this demon, you'd be having mercy on me. When I was in college, I went to school with a guy named Jake. We sat next to each other in choir. And Jake went to seminary too after college because we studied religion together. He was diagnosed with cancer in the mid-2000s, and during his battle, he started a blog called The Theology of Cancer, in which he invited pastors and theologians from all over the United States and some from out of the country to write about cancer and God, to talk about it. Luther Seminary professor Dr. Andy Root likens cancer to the demonic. And I'm being very careful in how I say this here, because he says it from what he observes. Root says, quote, "Cancer is an interruption that divides and separates. That's why it is demonic. It's the work of demons in the Bible to divide and separate, to interrupt so that they can steal," end quote. So in both Mark and Matthew's Gospels, the work of demons is to interrupt, divide, and separate. And the Canaanite woman begs Jesus to mend what has been broken and separated. "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." So by mending what is separated and what is broken, it's really a mercy on the mother. The hope of the gospel in both Matthew and Mark is that it's not just the demonic things that can interrupt, though, but so too does the Word of God. God's interruption, however, is one that does not act in the shadows without a name, like a demon or a disease, not to divide and separate. No, God's interruption is to bring together and make whole again. God's interruption can be found in the encounter of God's personhood in Jesus Christ, like with Saul, who was interrupted on the road to Damascus. One that at one point in time was someone who exemplified his career by dividing and separating people, but now he became a changed man, one that would help try to bring together and unify the church. So the woman goes up to Jesus, the one that was familiar with death, so that it would have no power to ultimately and finally separate us and divide us from each other. And the woman's back and forth with Jesus, I think, it says a lot about her faith. In a way, she wrestles with him, at least verbally, but I do know that girls can kick your butt if you're wrestling with them. And in doing so, in wrestling with Jesus, she wrestles with God, kind of like Jacob wrestling in Genesis with the angel at the shores of the Peniel. I think the woman's wrestling with Jesus says something important about what it means to be in a relationship with God, that is, to have faith. In both Gospels, when the woman begs Jesus, he ignores her. It's not really something we think about Jesus all that often. Okay? This isn't the most flattering story for her. In fact, he kind of talks down to her and calls her a dog. In both Gospels, when she begs, he ignores her, but she presses him, and she continues to offer up her prayer. "Have mercy on me, have mercy on me, have mercy on me." In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus essentially pushes her away and says, "My mission isn't for your people, but it was only for the people of the house of Israel." But the woman doesn't walk away. She's persistent, she's insistent. She continues to beg, to plead, to offer her prayer to Jesus. "Have mercy on me, Lord. My daughter is tormented by a demon." And finally, when he does respond, in Mark and Matthew's Gospel, as I said, there's no easy way to say this, but Jesus is kind of racist and sexist. He calls her the B word. He calls her a female dog. "Let the little children be fed first. It's not fair to take the children's food, throw it to the dogs." And the amazing thing is that although Jesus verbally pushes her away, hoping she'd leave him alone, leave the disciples alone, she leans right into it, pushes back, stands her ground like two wrestlers locked at the shoulders and says, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And she also says, "Yes, it is, Lord. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." That's in Matthew versus Mark. She stands her ground, and she says it with respect, too. My friends, what has happened here, I think, is an authentic, grounded relationship. And it is grounded in the belief that the relationship was worth fighting for. A back-and-forth exchange, a wrestling with God, an act of lived faith. Even though the two push and pull one another, Jesus doesn't walk away. She doesn't walk away from him either. In fact, I think this says a lot about our relationship with God as a church, which is our faith. I think it's something that we can take comfort in. Some of us come from backgrounds where you shouldn't be mad, you shouldn't shake your fist at God or question God. That doesn't leave a whole lot of room for being authentic, I think. But the Christian God, not just the God in the story, but in the whole human story, is a relational God, and a relationship with this relational God may be like a wrestling match where there's push and pull. Because we strive to be in relationship with each other, though, we don't just pin the other person and walk off. We keep pushing and pulling, giving and taking. I think the woman's wrestling with Jesus says something important about relationships in a community of faith. In Matthew's version of the story, it's important to note that when the woman cries out to Jesus for help and he ignores her, the disciples kind of pile on as well. They say, "Send her away. She keeps shouting at us." But she presses on anyways. She continues to lock shoulders with Jesus because she believed he could heal her and her daughter. He could mend the broken relationship. She had faith in him. And I think the experience of the disciples says a lot about what it means to be in a community of faith as well. Because this is how we function sometimes when we as a church sometimes disagree or get upset or mad or sad with each other about worship or politics or the way things are getting done or not done or change. But the thing is, even though the disciples don't agree with the woman, she still has a place. She still gets a voice. Even Jesus tries to silence her. She still has a voice. She stands in her own power, and she's heard out. And in the end, the disciples and Jesus relent. Now, as people of faith in a community of faith, we have a voice in our congregation. Yes, we elect people to serve on councils and committees and teams, but your voice ultimately is important, and we collectively take care of our church because everything involving church has to be done relationally with others, like with the woman and with Jesus. We can be big enough to take the push or to give one if we have to, when one's needed. We might disagree with each other at times, but we agree to disagree, and we still gather for worship and fellowship together, and donuts and coffee and juice afterwards. And we still need to work together to press into the future to be the church for the church. I want to leave you with one final thing. I think this woman's wrestling with Jesus says something about the importance of her getting things right in her relationships, in her personal life. The relationship with her daughter. And this relationship, for all intents and purposes, was the most important one in her life. We don't hear anything about a husband. We don't hear anything about some life partner or parents or other children or friends or churchgoers. Nobody else. We just hear about this daughter. And she says, "Have mercy on me." Not have mercy on my daughter. Have mercy on me as her mother. Now, this tells us how much the estrangement between her and her daughter was affecting her and the power it has in our own lives when we truly love someone or something and something stands in our way. The relationship between the woman and her daughter was so important to her in Matthew and Mark that they would seek out Jesus. And here's the thing. She's a foreigner to Jesus. She's from a different ethnicity, speaks a different language. She's a different kind of person than he was. And that was a big deal. And he was not just any rabbi or healer. She sought out the one that both Gospels tell us was not on a mission for her people, but for the people of Israel. Now, all of these things show the social obstacles that she had to contend with to even ask Jesus for help, the one who worked miracles, but not for the Gentiles. Even the disciples say in Matthew's story that she'd been following them, calling out for help. And Mark tells us that before Jesus could get away, she begs him. Now, that is persistence. She gets ignored and flatly denied, but she stands with her shoulders locked with the Lord. And even in the midst of all this, she doesn't walk away and let the demon divide and separate her from her daughter. She pleads her love with humility, pours out everything, and drops to her knees in worship. And with that grace, love overrides everything, rupturing the ethnic restraints of Jesus' mission to the Jews by extending healing to a Gentile. But it also restores the relationship between daughter and mother. For saying that, you may go. The demons left your daughter, Jesus says. So she goes home, finds the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone, says Mark. And great is your faith, let it be done as you wish, says Matthew. Her daughter was healed, the demon cast out, the spirit gone, the relationship made whole, the unclean entity exorcised. Even though this is an exorcism story, the healing miracle itself doesn't need to be the focus of the story, but rather what it says about restored relationships. Our God is a God who wants us to be in relationship together, in relationship with God, and relationship with fellow people of faith and the wider world. So friends, on this Halloween Sunday, as we hear about Jesus the Exorcist, may the faith of the Canaanite woman be one that you can take with you this week. Because her faith teaches us something about how we relate to God in our faith. Her wrestling with Jesus shows us that Jesus was big enough to take the push. And it says something about our faith in a God that wants to be in relationship with us. The faith of the Canaanite woman is something that we can think about as we understand how we relate to each other here at Christ Church, or even as people of faith in general. And finally, the faith of the Canaanite woman can help us understand our relationships not just with our friends and families, but it might help us understand that our God is a God who works beyond the things which divide and separate us. And part of having a lived faith in this God might mean working to restore relationships which have been divided and separated for too long. So Jesus the Exorcist was a wrestler of sorts. But instead of walking away in the wake of being challenged by the woman with a bruised ego, he's moved to restore and mend their broken relationship. Perhaps that is the real exorcism story of this gospel lesson. Thanks be to God for a love like this.